I'm Colin Seal, the founder and CEO of Think Law, and I am really excited to spend some time breaking through what I think is one of the most important aspects of our work, which is demystifying what it takes to make critical thinking actually actionable. It's one thing to plan for critical thinking, it's one thing to want it to happen, but we want to make sure that when it does happen, it's not an absolute disaster. Again, if you're not already doing it, you can follow us at Colin E. Seal on Twitter, Colin Seal on Instagram, or you can follow us on Think Law pages at Think Law US on Twitter and IG. And again, any questions you have during this, please feel free to give me an email at colin@thinklaw.us. So let's go through this. Let's kind of hop right in. And let me ask you this whole idea around why we're even here. We speak a lot in education about why critical thinking matters more than it ever did. But I don't think we really break down some of the nitty gritty tools it takes to get there. When I talk about nitty gritty, I talk about this idea that most conferences we go to, most PDs we attend, we get some pie in the sky theories, and it's like, all right, great. But what does this mean for me on a Tuesday morning in March? Nothing. I want to make sure that we unpack that and go beyond this. And I want to warn you that when we talk about critical thinking, there's a massive hypocrisy in the way that it comes up. Where on one hand we say this is so important and so crucial, but on the other hand, we treat it like a luxury good. And even if we actually believe that it can be taught to all kids, we struggle with actually doing so. This is why when you look at the work that I lead with Think Law, where we help educators teach critical thinking using real life legal cases in upper grades, fairy tales and nursery rhymes in lower grades, and a lot of trainings just like this one, we use critical thinking workshops both for teachers and for parents to close what we call this critical thinking gap. This is where the difference starts to really shine through. Part of what we look at is this question of what is critical thinking anyhow? We say it all the time, but what does it actually mean? Well, it's a combination of having these critical thinking skills, knowing how to reason, how to infer, even how to think about your own thinking, and also having these dispositions, these habits, these mindsets to go with critical thinking. We also know that we're not just trying to make this single subject, single discipline. It's not going to be good enough to be a critical thinker in just one topic. You got to be able to be transferring this because when you look at automation and nanotechnology and just the rapid change of how things are moving, our young people are going to have to be prepared to be super adaptable, super flexible as they look at their career trajectories. So let's think about this for a second. We know critical thinking matters. Why do you think it is that when we try to do this, it doesn't work? Take a quick second and just sort of write down a quick reflection, throw it in the chat, make it clear. Like, why do you think that lessons involving critical thinking just don't work? You're probably starting to think about just maybe mismatches between what you thought would be interesting and what kids actually found interesting. You're probably thinking about the time management going out of whack. You're probably thinking about a lot of things that you've seen gone wrong. In fact, a lot of times when we say that you're an experienced educator, what does that mean? It means you've done messed up a whole lot. And you've learned from those mistakes. So you won't make them again. But when we look at the way that the workforce is changing in education, how long can we really afford to have newer teachers, newer educators make these same mistakes? Especially when that mistake is around critical thinking, especially when we know that when educators try something new and it doesn't work, it's very likely they won't do it again. And I want to stick with you a little bit more. A lot of folks who work in the gifted education space do a lot to support general education teachers in gifted education. Well, if you're giving them these tools and these resources and these ideas, and you're saying, oh, these are low floor, high ceiling ideas that can raise the bar for critical thinking and allow you to differentiate for your gifted learners, and it falls flat, they ain't going to do that again. They're done. One and done. You got one chance. So how do we start to make the best out of that single opportunity? Let's look into this for a little bit. And if you take a look at what this slide actually has, I actually put a timer on it because that's part of it. Right? It's 2 minutes. And in this 2 minutes, I want to make sure I talk about what I'm going to talk about. We're going to talk about getting over barriers. And we're going to do this in a way where we talk about the kinds of objectives that we're going to use. You think you know what SMART objectives are, but you probably are using a very different SMART acronym than I recommend. We're also going to be making sure that we think about how do we actually make it happen? How do we actually start to piece these things into our curriculum as it exists in a way that's sustainable? And then I want to make sure that whatever we learn can actually be applied to things that you're teaching. Whether it's things that you're teaching tomorrow, whether it's the summertime and you're teaching these things next semester, I want you to actually put it in a real plan so that you can see what it looks like and try it out when the time comes. So a lot of you hear this all the time. You got to have SMART goals, SMART goals. And well, what is SMART goals? Those specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bound. This is not the way, people. This is not what we want to do. We're done with this. No more of this, okay? Because there's a lot of problems with this. When I think about specific, for instance, I once worked with a teacher, a science teacher, and he was an eighth grade teacher, and in his state, this was a tested grade for science. And I looked at his lesson plans and I was like, well, what is going on? Why are you spending almost 2 weeks on desert tortoises? I mean, desert tortoises are not even going to be a tested topic in this tested grade. What are you doing? He's like, well, we're going on a field trip at the end of the month and there's going to be desert tortoises there. And I'm like, all right. So you had a specific goal, but it had no real point. Had no real point. And that's an example of where we're at. This is an example of why SMART goals are not really where we need to be. Instead of SMART, the way that you know it, I want you to reconsider it this way. When I think about SMART goals, I want to talk about that S not being specific, but being strategic. Why am I doing this? How is it moving my organization forward? If this is my goal today, how does it get my kids where they need to be by the end of this unit, by the end of this school year? If I'm really being strategic and I know that a third of my class is 2 grade levels behind, then part of my day-to-day goal can't just be a specific number around, all right, I want 80% of my kids to be proficient by showing 80% mastery more in this topic. I might need to get more into the weeds. I might really want to think about all the prerequisites that come before this lesson. And I might want to say, you know what? With some combination of intervention before school, after school, I want to make sure that 90% of my kids who are below grade level know the prerequisites to this lesson before we get started. So that's how I know that I'm being strategic and not just specific. The truth is, measurable goals are specific by design, right? Like if you can't name it, you clearly can't measure it. So that old word specific gets tied into measurable. What I want you to think about with measurable, though, is that it's not always quantitative. What I mean by that is, say you had the privilege of planning a middle school dance. What would be the qualitative ways that you would look at whether or not the dance was successful? Now, I know you know the quantitative ways, right? Like how many tickets you sold, how many people were there, how much money you raised. Qualitatively, how do you know a middle school dance was popping? How do you know? Well, I guess if like it wasn't all the boys standing on one wall and all the girls standing on another wall, but everybody was in the center and they were dancing and singing songs, and maybe I can say that. Maybe the real indicator is like, what does Monday morning look like? Because if kids are still talking about it on that Monday, then you know that that was like the party of the century, right? So like there's ways to measure the qualitative, and that matters because a lot of people have goals in education, like, I want my kids to have a love for learning. Great. How does that look? Because if you can't see it, if you don't know what to look for, how can you measure it? How can you determine that it's actually been met? Here's the other thing. For some reason in SMART goals, the A usually stands for either attainable or achievable. In this model, we change it to ambitious. Why do we do that? Well, I think there's something funky about achievable, attainable. I feel like it makes you set lower expectations because you want to say, hey, at least I met the goal. At least I met the goal. So if you have a goal around saying, like, okay, well, I want to make sure that 10% of my kids do better on the test than they did last year. It's like, okay, well, you could probably achieve that, but is that really strategic? Is that really going to move the organization forward? If I think about ambitious, I want to think about something that's going to be a game changer for the organization, something that's really going to move it forward. Like if you can get every single one of your pre-kindergarten students in your early childhood program to be ready for kinder. If you could figure out a way so that every single child is walking out of fourth grade with a full working understanding of the way the scientific method is put together. Like there's all these things that you could put together to say like these are ambitious. And where we fix that, where we really deal with it, and where we're living for today's workshop is around that realistic part. We all know that a goal without a plan is just a wish. Let me say that again for those of y'all that might want to tweet stuff out to the universe. A goal without a plan is just a wish. So you can't just sit here talking all this craziness about ambition. I can't say, oh man, I'm going to be a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. At any given time when you are watching this, the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys may not be having the best of experiences. But I tell you what, no matter how hard I try, probably not going to happen. The way my height is set up, the way my muscle structure is set up, the way my knees are set up, it's just probably not going to work. But if you want to be realistic, if you want to have a well thought out plan to get you to an ambitious goal that's more normal, right? That's something that's within your actual power. Now we're not in that wish territory. Now we've got a goal with the plan. And it's okay that it's an ambitious plan because we have an ambitious way to get there. Okay. You can have an ambitious goal if you have an ambitious way to get there. And then, of course, it's time bound. Usually it's with one instructional block, one class period, whatever your time constraints are is what we mean when we say our time block. So let's dig through this a little bit deeper and let's kind of think about this within the context of what it means to actually make these goals. New Year's resolutions, we love to make these, but we also love to break them. We break them because this is what they tend to look like. And I put this here because we do this a lot in education. We might have a goal up on a board because our chapter forces us to put an objective up there and our administrators require it. But when it comes down to what we're actually doing at any given moment, we're doing the equivalent of saying, yeah, I got to spend more family time. Yeah, I got to make sure I lose some weight. Got to make sure these kids learn these fractions. Yeah, my kids got to be able to write this three paragraph essays, these 5 paragraph essays, but you're not really thinking through it a little bit deeper, right? We're not saying something like, all right, what we're gonna do is I am gonna save money, but I'm not saying I'm gonna save money. I'm saying that I'm gonna pay myself first. I'm gonna open up a savings account and I'm gonna deduct money straight from my paycheck into that savings account. I'm going to make sure I find a savings account that's going to penalize me if I take money out more than 2 times a month because I really wanted to stay in there. And now I've got an ambitious goal, but a plan to go with it to make it realistic. Today, when I talk about realistic, I really want to start by thinking about the objective. If we're being smart about the objective. And this is just even in our thinking about it. I don't even care how we write it because sometimes you're stuck with what you have in your book. You're stuck with how your administrator prefers it. I don't care. I just want you to understand what are we doing and why are we doing it. If we're just sitting here doing random activities that look fun, that look cool, right? We're stacking Legos on Legos on Legos, and we've got projects going on that we're just calling STEM. We're just calling project-based learning. We're just calling it that. Let's make sure we understand and prioritize that learning component. So at the end of the activity, students will be able to, what is that going to be? And if what you're telling me is a thing that they are doing, but not something that they're learning, not a skill they are gaining, you might be missing the boat. You might be setting yourself up for a critical thinking failure. I think about this in the context of a colleague that I had who was a social studies teacher trying to get kids to understand what the conditions were before workers' rights laws were passed. Talking about, like, reading the jungle and talking about like sweatshops and all that stuff. So she created this whole activity around these assembly lines and sweatshops where kids are trying to make these teddy bears. But of course, every part of this was focused on the teddy bears. Nobody cared about anything but the teddy bears. So the activity consumed the learning and the skills. So when I think about this, when I think about like prioritizing the learning aspect of an activity, thinking about what action is actually going to happen, what are they doing? Not just the busy work they're doing, but what is the actual thing? Are they assessing? Are they giving examples of something? Are they critiquing something? I need to make sure I know what that action is. And when I think about this, okay, that's like an individual set lesson plan. If we start digging deeper and we start asking bigger questions about what do you want to do, we always start every school year with something very similar to a concept of a New Year's resolution. This year, I'm going to get every single thing graded within 2 days of initially assigning it and receiving it back from students. We all know you lying. You know you lying, but we say it anyway, right? But let's just say we made these goals. Let's just say we made a goal like that, right? And we start breaking down like the plan to do it, right? We're like, all right, I'm going to set up my schedule this way. I'm going to make sure that I use my prep periods instead of like, doing whatever shenanigans that I was doing. I'm going to make sure I get these things done. I'm going to really work on making sure that I don't even leave here on a Tuesday and a Thursday to make sure that I get everything done. I don't want to fall behind. I want to make sure my kids get this stuff. So you got a plan. You got an ambitious goal. You got a plan. You run it by your colleagues, and what do your colleagues say to you? Yeah, that's a great plan. Yeah, you could do this. Oh, the Tuesday and Thursday thing, that sounds great. Yeah, 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 yeah. Let me ask you a question. How would you feel if that's not the reaction that you got? How would you feel if somebody looked at you and said, oh, word? Oh, you're going to get your grades in? Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Maybe you'll keep that up for 1 week, but we all know how this is going to go down. Stop wasting your time. This is a ridiculous goal. Don't even waste your time. Don't even waste the ink on your pen to write that down. Don't even waste the battery on your phone to type that into your phone because we know it's not going to happen. How do you feel if someone talks to you like that? You're like, who does that? Right? You would call that a negative Nancy, but that's like an insult to Nancy's. That's messed up. Because what kind of person kills your hopes and dreams for the future before you even get a chance to give it a start? And if there's nothing else I get through to you with this opening pre-work activity, it's that I want you to be this kind of person who kills hopes and dreams before they even start. I want this to be you. I want you to do this. This process known as the pre-mortem, it recognizes the reality that we have a psychological attachment to our goals. And the people around us, our colleagues, our loved ones, our family members, our friends, they're all in with our goals. And if you start thinking about a post-mortem, you all probably watch enough Grey's Anatomy to know what that is, right? Somebody dies at a hospital and like, we'll try to figure out, yo, this is weird. What happened? So they study it because they know that when they study what went down, then the nurses are better off in the future, the doctors are better off in the future, the hospital administration is better off in the future. Who is not better off? Whoever this dude is that did not quite make it. And if you think about what I just said earlier about the value of experience, we don't really have time to have people put together these lessons and have them become a complete disaster. The critical thinking gap is so urgent. We need critical thinkers now more than ever. We can't afford to mess up. We can't afford for our lessons to be a disaster, which means we've got to kill it before it starts. The idea of the pre-mortem is it's already the last day of school. And your big idea around getting these assignments graded within 48 hours of getting them turned in, it didn't work. You were way off. It's the last day of school, and I'm telling you, you failed. So tell me why you failed. What happened? Here's what's interesting. Teachers is almost like part of our DNA. We love to judge stuff after the fact. Woo! I think that's actually the textbook definition of being a teacher. People who judge stuff after the fact. That's how you know you're a teacher. You're looking at these things. You could always find the trends afterwards. But while it was happening, you don't necessarily have that same kind of energy. But here we are. It moves everyone to the afterwards. So now your colleague down the hallway can be like, oh, I think I have a good idea. Like, you probably didn't do it because you didn't anticipate all the new kids that are going to be added in your class this year. You probably didn't anticipate the idea that, you know, the way that you were grading wasn't going to be very sustainable because it was just a lot. And we changed the system and you had bugs in the system. You didn't really account for the amount of intervention you would have to do this year. So they were assignments you were making up on the fly. You didn't have an answer key. You start realizing like there are a lot of ways that this can go bad that you can now plan for. The whole point of doing this exercise is you've already killed it. You've already had a disaster lesson. And now you're retooling it. Think about what this means. Anyone that's a middle school or high school teacher, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I feel so sorry to this day for my first period class every year I've ever taught because they were always the guinea pigs. They always got the worst version of anything that I was going to teach that day. And literally all throughout the day, I would look at exit slips and be like, ooh, really screw that one up. I won't make that mistake again. And by the end of the day, I sounded like I knew what I was talking about. But it would have been pretty awesome for that first period class if I would have actually killed the idea earlier and predicted the ways that these mistakes would have gone down. So let's take a look at what this actually looks like and requires in practice, because what we're doing is a pre-mortem of sorts of why critical thinking doesn't work. So we think about this idea. A lot of it comes down to this feeling of engagement replacing learning. And I've already talked about this idea that engagement and learning should not be used interchangeably. There's other proxies for learning that don't really work either. Students being busy and just doing a whole bunch of stuff, that's not necessarily showing me that kids are learning. It's showing me that they're doing a whole bunch of stuff. The reality is, even when kids are engaged and motivated, I don't necessarily even know that that means that they're learning. My kids are engaged when they're watching Frozen 2. I'm engaged too. I ain't really learning a whole lot though. If you think about students getting all this attention and feedback and explanations, listen to me. It is so easy for kids to be getting all this feedback and explanations but be learning nothing because you're actually taking away their chance to learn. You're spoon feeding so much, you're breaking it down and scaffolding it so much that they're never actually having a grasp for information. Even this idea of like a calm and under control classroom. I always wonder, did y'all make a deal? I don't do nothing, you don't do nothing? Because how, how, when? Kids aren't quiet. Kids just don't sit around quiet for long periods of time. Covering material. If you checked it off and you taught it, that doesn't necessarily mean that kids learn. All it means is that you taught it. Are you a preacher or are you a reacher? Right? Like you can't just sit there just talking to people. You got to make sure learning is actually happening. And here's what really got me. When kids would actually give you correct answers, even though they didn't really know them, even though they can't do it on their own, even though they forget it as if it's like Twilight Zone. I'm like, yo, were none of y'all in class that day? Am I making this up? Was nobody even there? Because this quiz was showing me that nobody was even there. And here's what really got me. My first year teaching, I thought I was like the rookie of the year, the best teacher in the history of teaching. And then I realized my kids were just really good at playing school. They were playing all these games. They didn't really know what was going on, but they listened to my voice and they could just tell where I was going with it. So they bombed the first exam. Another year, the year started out, and I really held up. I really was doing my thing. And I learned after the first test, the average was like an 89, close to a 90. I'm like, wow, that is so amazing. And I asked one of my top students, like, quick question. Why am I so awesome? Like, I just feel like I'm doing a really incredible job as your kid's teacher. Don't you think? And I wanted to just know, like, what makes me so effective? And she looked at me, rolled her eyes, and said, Mr. Seal, we did all of this last year. I'm like, that's not true. You're seventh graders. You did sixth grade math last year. This is seventh grade. She's like, nope, because whatever the teacher's name, he had too many preps and he didn't want to do all those preps. So he just decided to teach the sixth graders seventh grade math too. And I'm like, that sounds like a thing that could actually happen. Um, and she goes even further and says, look at our textbooks. You'll see our names are already in them. And I'm like, well, then I was about to spend a whole year thinking that I was like the boss. And they already knew this. They already learned it. So when I start thinking about proxies of learning, what I want to do is focus on this idea that it's got to be able to think hard. Kids got to be able to think hard in a way that actually connects to something meaningful. So what I want you to do right now, I want you to think about a time where you had a lesson where you saw kids were engaged. You saw it. They were locked in. But the learning outcomes did not come out the way you thought. Now, I'll give you an example of this because I experienced this once when I was doing an observation. There was a class where they were doing these 10 patterns. They were learning all the different ways to like add up to 10. And they had these 10 blocks where like you would go grab a 2, you find somebody with an 8, boom, there goes your 10. 5, another 5, boom, your 10. 3, 7, bam, 10. And the kids were rocking. I was like, all right, check this out. They're like interacting with one another. They're outside of their seats. Listen to me. Any administrator walks into this room, you're like, this is what education is supposed to look like. But let me tell you something. They sat down. They had to answer about 5 questions. The questions were very simple. 2 plus 8 equals. 1 plus 9 equals. These kids were like, you can teach us this? What is this? And I'm looking at them, and the teacher's looking at me, and like, what just happened? And it turned out they never made the connection. They never actually made the connection between what they were learning at that moment in terms of the activity and what the learning outcome was. It had to be a more explicit connection. That's a very popular pre-mortem issue. We've got a really cool activity, but we have not made the connection explicit. So let's talk through some ways that we can start to build out more units like this, generally speaking. I know that if I can make it personal, if I can find this way to like minimize the amount of time that I'm talking, if I can force kids and ask them to really dig into evidence, if I myself can find a way to stay neutral, and if I can make sure that as a part of this, I'm giving lots and lots of thinking time, now I know that I'm getting there. So one of the things that we do when we do our Think Law program is we actually do a whole survey at the beginning. We get a lot of information from kids around the state of critical thinking. And we know, for instance, that they like when we make it personal. They like when we tell jokes, we make silly faces, we find a way to relate things to folks, right? We start thinking about the way that students don't really want us to talk. They want students to lead the discussion. So just because a kid asks a question doesn't mean you need to answer. Other kids can actually answer, right? Like I can't, maybe I can just pose another question. I'm not even answering at all. The idea of being able to explain their thinking, having students lead the discussion, because who's to say that you need to be the facilitator for a discussion, right? Students could do the same exact thing, and that's a really important 21st century skill. If we start thinking about encouraging evidence, believe it or not, kids like being pushed on that. They like the challenge of it. And if you make that part of your habit and routine, it really does push things. And we start thinking about some concrete strategies to get there. Some of the things that I'd like to really focus on is the wait time. And when I say wait time, I'm talking about giving equitable access for kids to think through things. Ask them a big picture, thought-provoking, open-ended question, and then shut your mouth for 10 seconds. 10 seconds can feel like an eternity. But it's a time to really create equity in your spaces because you're giving kids that are slower processors or English learners or just more thoughtful a chance to really think through what they want to do on any given topic. Think about spacing out the way you cover material so that it's not just this sort of spoon fed feeling all the time, but they actually need to like forget in order to remember. Strategic forgetting makes it so that they're actually going to have to seek that recollection and go through that process of trying to remember things. So, again, these are just some strategies to help bring yourself forward when it comes to this. But there's other things that we see all the time. It seems like every time you decide to put together your strongest critical thinking instruction is a fire drill. It's so annoying. Is it like a conspiracy against good instruction that they always put a fire drill the day that you got your best stuff planned? Anyhow, absent a fire drill, what are some concrete things that you can do to make sure your pacing doesn't get impacted when you're doing critical thinking instruction? And this is something I see so much. Things always take longer than you thought. So what I would do is I'll make sure that you plan every major lesson part of it very carefully and add an extra minute or two just to play it safe. Don't skimp on the materials. Take the time to make sure that it's prepped and do that pre-mortem. How could this be used incorrectly? What might I be missing? Why won't this activity actually happen? Why won't the learning happen? I want to think about those materials. Here's the thing. In secondary grades in particular, like my elementary people, they usually don't have a problem with this. But the routine classroom procedures, handing out papers, going in and out of group work, that can't be something that takes forever. In fact, forget about checking for understanding when it comes to content. That's a whole nother thing. Are we checking for understanding when it comes to doing the activity? Like, how often has you as educators sat in a workshop just like this one and you're all into it and you're paying attention and you got your little doodle notes going and you break out into some group and you're looking around like, what are we supposed to be doing right now? If you're doing this as a grown up, as someone that does this for a living, what do you expect a fifth grader to do? What do you expect a third grader to do? A kindergarten student? A teenager? Like, what are they going to do? They're not paying attention. So check for understanding. Have them repeat it out loud to somebody. Get people to like really confirm what's going on so they don't waste all this time checking to see what they're supposed to be doing. I want to do the same thing for learning as well because I want to make sure that I'm assessing learning as we go, which is a big part of what today's workshop is all about. I want to make sure like I know who my kids are. I know what kind of accommodations need to be placed into these lessons. I know the second I finish doing whole group instruction, there's going to be a set of kids that I need to work with right away. And I know this because I know my kids. Don't make it a surprise, plan for it. And in case you finish early, which shouldn't happen, but maybe certain kids might finish early, have a real plan. Don't just tell them to read. Don't just tell them to help other students. Every kid deserves to be challenged every day. If kids are finishing these activities 15 minutes early and it's actually correct, please have a backup plan because it's not fair to just have them help somebody else or just read a book or become your aide and do a bunch of nonsense. Like they need to be challenged every day. Number 7 and 8 actually work in conjunction. And I've had some administrators really perk up at 7 and 8. And I've had some teachers feel really like judged with 7 and 8. And I don't want either thing to happen. If you think about this idea that kids learn when they're doing, more or less, I want to think about how can I design my instruction so that there's at least 1/3 of that time for kids to actually do stuff so they can practice, so they can like really be able to like delve in. Well, it kind of goes back to this other part, number 7. You got to get rid of the fluff. Got to get rid of the fluff. And when I say fluff, I'm not trying to tell you that the things in your lesson are not important. What I'm trying to tell you is if you're doing a warm up or an opening activity or a bell ringer or whatever, and it's asking about like someone's opinion about something, you're just trying to really sort of break the ice or whatever have you, maybe you don't need 11 different kids to respond. Maybe 3 is fine. I know everyone wants to speak. I know every kid wants to be included, but like keep it moving. Because sometimes those things aren't really adding a whole lot of extra value, but they're taking away crucial time that will go towards like the actual instruction. I remember I did this when I first started teaching, and I noticed a lot of younger, less experienced teachers do the same exact thing. They make their warm-ups go forever. That little bell ringer do now, I'm like, why you got 5 questions on there? How you spending 15 minutes out of 45-minute period on your opening? That's too long, right? It's going to set you up so that you won't have any time to practice. So that's the section on pacing. And I could think about something like this. I could think about all these different lesson ideas that look good on paper. But if I start to do this pre-mortem about what will go wrong and address the solution to these in advance, now I'm in a much stronger space to be able to analyze where I'm going with this stuff. Thinking about what could go wrong on these sorts of activities. So I want to just kind of close out with a couple of other topics that really help us get to this idea of planning to avoid disaster when it comes to critical thinking. We need to connect this to a why. Why are we learning this thing that we are learning? So, what's the big picture? What is this? This is an orange. What is this? Looks pretty weird. Is that Starbucks foam? I don't know. Maybe you need coffee. You need to just get some. It's a banana. If I look at this, it's a leafy substance, but it's not legal in every state yet, so it's just regular trees, not the trees some of y'all are thinking about. And then here, you might try to psych yourself out here, but it is what it looks like. It's a spider's leg. Here's the point. If all you're looking at is a spider's leg, if all you're looking at is the pulp, you might not see that it's an orange. You might not see that it's a spider. Again, we've got to be explicit about the way that it connects with the big picture. We can't have kids learning about plants and you're asking, like, why are you learning about an amoeba? Why are you learning about an amoeba? Why in the world does every student in the United States spend time on the amoeba? Well, I don't know. We spend time on animals. I don't know. We spend time on plants. But why are we learning amoebas? What's the point? Maybe it will be helpful to just tell me that an amoeba is a single cell organism. A cell is a building block of life. So if we can understand how an amoeba lives, dies, reproduces, then maybe I can cure cancer. Maybe I can understand the complexities of the human body. But it starts with the building block of life. Okay, fine. But be explicit. I've got to make it clear, or else I'm just looking at a piece of pulp. I'm just looking at a leg of a spider. I need to know the big picture in an explicit sort of way. Okay? So a lot of times I've got these like traumatic memories of getting observed. And every time I would get observed, the administrator would go talk to some joker kid in my class and he'd be like, well, what are you doing right now? Beats the hell out of me. And I'd be like, oh, so embarrassed. And I realized at any given moment, I don't even know what I am doing. Like right now, I can't tell you what I'm about to say next because I don't even know. I'm kind of a lost person. I'm all over the place. But why am I doing it? Now, if I walk through a classroom and every child knew why they were doing something, then I'm like, all right, now we're really, really working with something. You might not know exactly what we're doing at this second because you are in sixth grade and sixth graders don't know anything about what they're doing at any given second. But if you could tell me why amoebas matter, if you could tell me why systems of equations are a thing, if you could talk to me about why parallel sentence structure is important to know, now I feel like this class is on the right track. They know why they're here. And I could do a lot when I have that why down. When I start thinking about this, I know that big picture questions tie the content in a much more relevant way. It makes it stick more, and it makes me understand how it all connects. It makes them want to desire and dig a little bit deeper. So when we start making sure that they can do this, there's a lot of strategies that we can go through. Part of what I want to do is make sure that, one, my objectives always make this clear. Don't be that teacher that has that super powerful, really big picture essential question, but never gives your kids a chance to answer it, nor the tools to figure out what that answer could be. So if we start thinking about what this means, about being explicit about it. It means that we also have to be explicit around what it takes to get them there. One of the things that I'm very, very passionate about is this concept of language of the discipline. So I'll tell you why I'm this way. Because I cannot stand shenanigans. An apostrophe is not a comma in the sky. Please don't mention the butterfly method around me. Okay? I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of people just doing ridiculousness and drawing butterflies. Talk about the processes. Make me understand why we're finding common denominators. Don't tell me, oh, well, you put the butterfly in this way and the butterfly. No, I don't want no one talking about the butterfly method. You understand that one day my daughter came home from school and she was telling time and she started using words like the hour hand and the minutes hand. And like, I just gave her candy. I just gave her candy. I'm like, you know what? That sounded so beautiful. I know it's only 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I know you would never get candy at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but if you're using academic language in my house, I'm gonna give you candy because it's a beautiful thing. You're not saying the short hand and the long hand, you're saying the hours hand and the minutes hand. Okay? And here's why this matters. You can't go camping without language of the discipline. If you don't know what a campfire is and what a flashlight is, you can't understand camping. Okay? You need to make sure that we go through this. The other thing about language is like it's not always the same. It matters in different contexts. If you are talking about the word face and you're a mathematician, you probably think about the face of a surface or a 3D figure. Face as a musician are the notes on the treble clef, F, A, C, and E in the spaces. Face to a geologist might be the face of a rock. Makeup artist, kind of obvious. To a novelist, it might be a term of art, about face. Face up to your shenanigans and stop using words like the butterfly method. So if I start thinking about this a little bit deeper and I start recognizing where the power is, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell me something. If you think about lexile levels, right, like the grade levels of text, I want you to look at this text about the Spanish Armada, English feet, and all this stuff, and terrible wind, rocky shores of Ireland. I want you to tell me, what grade level do you think that this is on? Okay? You got your options ranging from 3rd grade to 12th grade. What do you all think? What do you think? This is 11th grade. It's 11th grade. It's 11th grade. What? What'd you get there? Well, you got these words. Spanish Armada, the monarch, Protestant, defeating. You've got this idea around like the Spanish Armada, the Protestant religion, right? The Spanish monarch. We start thinking about these terms like, okay, all right, whatever. That's 11th grade. Fine. What about this? 3rd grade through 12th grade. Pick one. Battered by storms, significant, Protestant flotilla, 12th grade. This is 12th grade. It's 12th grade. Just these sorts of words in here are somehow accelerating this to 12th grade. Let's take a look at this one. Okay? Same sort of topic. Still about the Spanish Armada. Any guesses here? From 3rd grade to 12th grade? 9th grade. 9th grade. Simply knowing the term Armada. Simply being able to understand what some of those key words are. That brings the level of lexile complexity to beyond middle school. Just that. So if we start thinking about why this matters, we want to make sure that we're very explicit and around what we do with vocabulary. So we want to make critical thinking approachable. Let's make sure we have a real understanding of what this all means, especially for our English learners, especially for our kids that might struggle with understanding new concepts. So instead of just going through regular definitions and flashcards, maybe try a concept map. What's a revolution? So I say this word revolution. Repeat after me. Revolution. Revolution. What is it? I got a definition right there. What is examples of it? You got the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Cuban Revolution. What could it be like? It can be violent, political, and it changes government. Awesome. If I know all this, it changes my relationship with the word revolution. It changes it. If I start going a little bit deeper, I could do the same exact thing for words like division and foreshadowing and photosynthesis. If you want to give this a shot, pick one of these and see what that looks like to write your own concept map for these. Remember, you put the word in the center. What is it? Examples of it. What is it like? Some people have a word wall in their classrooms. Sometimes a word wall is literally words on the wall. This dude right here was just trying to get credit. I got words and they are on the wall. Please check my box. But let's do something more. If I wanted to think about word walls that are a little bit different, here's a word wall where we actually have someone that kind of put together with her students a word wall that was kind of a concept map as well. I don't really know what I'm looking at here, but they did this, so they knew what they were looking at. Here's another really cool word wall. This word wall was somewhat similar as well, but they actually had examples of what the things were, right? You see over here, you got a solute and a solvent. They have examples of what these things are. I used to always get those confused. I wouldn't get those confused if I actually was a part of this sort of deal too. If I start thinking about how to make these actually pop, I want to make sure that I'm using a combination of different things for the word wall and not just words. It shouldn't just be on a wall because these are words I need to know. I should probably have them in my notebooks as well. I want to give assignments from the word wall. I want to act like a fool if they use a word from the word wall because I want to encourage that use of academic language vocabulary because I know what it does. I know why that matters. Last but not least, I want to make sure that if I want my kids to write in the way that I know they need to demonstrate their critical thinking, I want to make sure that I get them ready to do this. Now, when I talk about scaffolding for rigorous sentence framing, I might not do this in March, but in September, maybe I will. Because if I'm a math teacher and I want to ask kids a question like, if you were a gambler in Las Vegas, would you prefer to know the odds of an event happening or the probability? What if you were a casino owner? Why? And you start realizing that, and I tell you what, I made that the first question of a test one time, and it was left blank by like 90% of my kids. Because it was the first test of the year. And looking back at it, I'm like, duh, like, if I'm not giving them a little bit more structure early on of how to tackle a question like that, how can I expect them to do it correctly? So this is the idea of sentence framing. If we had this question around, like, should student athletes be paid? And I gave you this information. I don't really care about the right answer. I care about, is there a sentence frame for this? Student athletes should not be paid. Student athletes should be paid because reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. Student athletes should not be paid because reason 1, reason 2, reason 3. If student athletes did not get paid, that might lead to blank. All right, give me the negative thing that might be the consequence that we don't want to deal with so that you can kind of support your side. Therefore, student athletes should not be paid. Bam. Okay, I just gave them a structure for a paragraph. Again, I might not do this. Maybe even in October or November. But I might want to make sure that gets started on that way because if you don't have exposure to critical thinking, how can you expect your kids to be successful in it if they haven't actually had the practice? So later, we're going to be talking about formative assessment. The whole goal of today is going to be making sure we understand this because this is one of the biggest challenges around why critical thinking doesn't lead to learning. But we'll get there. For now, what I want you to do is talk about which 2 strategies you feel most excited about trying out immediately. We're talking about doing SMART goals differently, using pre-mortems, thinking about ways that you can encourage thinking. We talked about your pacing, making that big picture explicit by talking about the why, language of the discipline, and sentence frames. So once you have that all figured out and what strategies you want to use, please make sure you fill this out in the Google form. Thank you so much. And again, if you aren't already doing it, please know you can email me at colin@thinklaw.us for any questions. And follow us on social media at thinklawus on Twitter, Colin E. Seal on Twitter, and Colin Seal on Instagram. Thank you.